All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last San Francisco Products Account webinar of the year. So to close this year out, we've got an insightful session ahead of us as we really explore practical strategies to incorporate accessibility into your product management practice. Moving beyond the check the box approach to really embracing accessibility as a critical business driver of usability and of business success. Before we jump in, I want to take a moment to highlight a few remarkable aspects of Products That Count, this incredible community that I'm lucky to be a part of. There are over 500,000 product managers reached by this community. And that means that Products That Count is one of the largest and most influential networks of product managers worldwide. There are over 3,000 resources available. This is videos, podcasts, and articles. And I'll jump to my favorite question that I always hear, will this be recorded? Absolutely. It is videos just like this one. You can truly find a wealth of expert knowledge to help you tackle the toughest product challenges on Products That Count and the How to Product YouTube channel. So if you're looking to grow your skills and stay cutting edge in the product world, this is truly the community for you. Now, a quick introduction. My name is Denise Hemke, and beyond here, outside of here, and my role as the San Francisco chapter lead for Products That Count, I am the Chief Product Officer at NeoGov, where we provide a comprehensive HR and public safety platform tailored to the needs of government agencies. It is my pleasure today to host two exceptional product leaders, Pam Manger and Divya Nagaraja. Pam is a senior manager at Workday, where she plays a pivotal role in ensuring product accessibility aligns with both the user needs and the business priorities. Pam brings deep expertise and a pragmatic approach to solving accessibility challenges in enterprise software. Joining her today is Divya Nagaraja, a senior product manager at Workday. Divya has been a champion for integrating accessibility into product development practices, helping teams move from reflexive fixes to proactive strategies that create an inclusive experience really for all users. So in today's session titled A Pragmatist Guide to Accessibility, or Accessibility 101 for PMs, Pam and Divya are going to walk us through the basics of accessibility and the tangible impact on the bottom line, the three most common areas where accessibility issues arise, and tools that you can leverage to improve your accessibility approach. Now, as some of you might know, I too was once upon a time at Workday and left in 2022. So this is an exciting session for me too, because the accessibility team has matured a lot, even in that short time frame, as I've learned in talking to Divya and Pam about today's session. And one aspect that I really like the most is their motto of progress over perfection, which I think truly at the heart of today's conversation. And I think that this will inspire you to take meaningful steps towards more accessible and more usable products in your world. But before we get started, a quick housekeeping note. If you have questions during this session, please use the Q&A function here on Zoom. And if you can't locate it, it's typically hiding under a ... menu, and you can find it there. Please post those questions in the Q&A throughout today's session. And in the back half of the session, I'll be fielding those questions to these two amazing leaders. With that, let's dive in. Pam and Divya, over to you.
Great intro. Thanks so much, Denise. So we can go ahead to the next. And this is our mandatory compliance statement, our product statement. It basically says, if you're making any purchase decisions, make them based on reality, not on any forward-looking statements we might discuss here today. And we've already done a pretty thorough intro of Divya and myself. Divya's been here for over 5 years, and I've been here for a little bit over 2 years. And we're both on the product accessibility team under Mary Romilay. So let's start with some questions. These are some questions we hear, from product managers internally and externally. What is digital accessibility? Why should my company care? How do I get started? And what are the top 3 things I need to know? And what tooling do I need? And how will my work affect end users and the bottom line? So we are going to get through all of these today. It's going to be a little speedy, but we do have a rich list of resources at the end, so you can find more information at the end. Let's start with these two. What is digital accessibility and why should my company care? So digital accessibility it enables everyone to access, easily use, and obtain equal value from an experience. So today we're going to be talking more about digital accessibility than physical accessibility, but let's just think about the difference between those two for a moment. So here is a man affected by paralysis using speech-to-text software to write an email, right? And assistive technology examples, for example, his wheelchair is an example of a physical assistive technology, as well as glasses and hearing aids, right? And then on the digital side of things, screen readers and captions are other examples of digital assistive technology. So it's important to note when your software, your app, your product doesn't work correctly for someone with a disability, that's the fault of your software and not the fault of the user who's trying to use it. So I love this graphic from Microsoft. Accessibility benefits everyone. When we think of a disability, we often focus on the permanent disabilities, like, for example, an individual who is deaf or blind, but accessibility is a spectrum. So let's just take a look at touch as an example. An example of a permanent disability is a man with only one arm. An example of a temporary disability is somebody with an arm injury, like a broken arm, so that he also has the use of one arm. And a situational disability may be a new parent who's carrying a baby in one hand and trying to order diapers on her phone with the other hand, right? So we can probably all identify with something in this picture. And if we're lucky enough to live to old age, inclusion will definitely benefit all of us. Examples that I've noticed recently myself, just kind of in the last month or so, in a noisy airport, I appreciated captions on the television on the show that I was trying to watch. In a bumpy car, I've appreciated large touch targets. And at a conference, it would have been really helpful if there was sufficient color contrast. White letters on a yellow background made it a little hard for me to parse and to find the expo I was looking for. So moving on to sketchplanations, this beautiful graphic from Perva on our team. Curb cuts were designed for people with wheelchairs. So there you can see the gentleman in the middle using that curb cut, but they benefit everyone. So for example, the man pushing the stroller, the woman delivering groceries, the man riding the bike, even the man with the rolly cart and the person with the cane and the skateboard. When we design things for disabilities, we make things better for everyone. So this is a really great example of accessibility benefiting everyone. And this is possibly the most important slide that I'll speak to today, and it's why we care about accessibility. So I tend to put things in these two buckets, carrot and stick. Let's talk about stick first and get that out of the way. Lawsuits are on the rise. It's a complex legal regime, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. Especially in e-commerce companies, lawsuits are becoming a thing. So this is something to monitor and also to talk to your legal team about to understand the risks. And not doing it is expensive in another way, which is if you let a bug get to production, an accessibility bug, it costs about 100 times more to fix it in production than it does if you catch it during the design phase. So we call this ship left, but essentially these two things added together, the cost of lawsuits and the cost of bug fixing in production, can really impact your bottom line, which is something that we all care about. And then on the carrot side, accessibility is just good for business, right? It opens the door to your business to 1 in 4 people who have a disability. And accessibility is really a subset of usability, and it ends up benefiting everyone. So everyone can get behind usability. They should also be able to get behind accessibility. And really, bottom line, this stuff is just really important to people. It's not just a check the box exercise, but it's rather thinking in terms of usability and what's good for the business. So let's take a look at this next question here. How do I get started? We pieced together a maturity model, looking at other people's maturity models, to really map our progress as a digital accessibility team from the early days to where we are now. And whether you call it 5 or 6 years in or 10 years in, we put ourselves a little bit past halfway in this maturity model. We wanted to kind of call your attention to 3 key movements that we've noticed that you may be noticing as well. We started with kind of a one-person team, and then it became a three-person team. And in the early days, it was scrappy. People wore all the hats. People were running around firefighting. And as we moved to the right in this maturity model, people developed specialized roles. Like now we have actually inbound and outbound PMs, which is phenomenal. And we have standard processes, nothing heavy-handed, but just enough to kind of guide us and make sure we're doing the right things. The second key movement that I wanted to discuss is shifting left to the accessibility conversation. And you're all familiar with shift left, but this is moving it from a check the box exercise, in your definition of done, or, during QA where people are like, yeah, we did it, we did accessibility, to really moving it into that usability conversation during the design phase. And we're getting there. It's really exciting to see and to be invited into those design conversations. So third key movement is we went from being the only evangelists in the company and talking about this stuff to now other teams are actually standing up their own accessibility experts. So there's a little mini accessibility team on Prism Analytics. And we have people like Jay Gill out in the organization, who do good accessibility work. And we see them as an extension of our team. And having those advocates is like critically important to us as we scale. What are some key actions that you can take to get started on this journey? Let's look at 4 of them next, and then I'll turn it over to Divya. So key action number 1, take stock. How accessible is your product? Are design and engineering teams thinking about accessibility? Are you making progress? So for example, we recently took stock and looked at all the components in our design system and delivered that to the component team and said, hey, here's where you can have the most impact and move the needle on accessibility. And the component team took it upon themselves to put together a roadmap over the next 4 releases that incorporated key pieces of accessibility and the most impactful work. And this is really phenomenal because I think it really shows the top-down support from that team. I'm thinking like Katie Holden, Sylvia Costello, and others. And it really elevates accessibility and importance so that it sits alongside like things like globalization and security as things that just really shouldn't be an afterthought, but should be thought of, right up front. So key action number 2, and this is kind of a boring one that we all kind of dread: remediate existing code, right? So PMs balance all these different demands. We've got legal, engineering, customers, end users, design, security, and many other teams that we talk to every day, and we're balancing all these different requirements. And accessibility issues necessarily exist in legacy code. Nobody is perfect. It's inevitable that you have some issues. And nobody loves a project to address technical debt. It's not the sexy, shiny new thing that everyone wants to be working on. So how can you make sure that some of these issues in your existing code get picked up for development? And our approach is to really try to get a firm commitment or a fixed date put on those issues that are the most critical. So in our world, we never create blockers, but the critical and the major issues, we try to get fixed dates on those when they're created so that people kind of have a sense, even if it's not happening immediately next week, we have a sense of when those things are going to get fixed. So that's something that you can do as well. Key action number 3, and this is the exciting part. We like to include accessibility in all new features. So we include it at every point in the software development lifecycle. Do we have this perfect? No, obviously there's 20,000 people in our organization. We haven't reached everyone. But really the next step in our maturity model as we move from left to right is to bake checks into tooling and to empower teams to do their own accessibility work. So again, having those advocates out there who are remembering accessibility and speaking up about it is super critical. And we all have a role to play here. So for UX, we include people with disabilities in our research. That's critically important. For design, you can include accessibility annotations in your Figma. And then for developers, you can include accessibility in your unit tests, and you can also be writing semantic HTML and using ARIA very sparingly because it does get overused. And then for the QA engineer, you can include those checks in your test plan. Moving on to key action number 4 before I turn it over to Divya. Just get started, right? We're all at different points on the journey. We're all learning new things every day. This stuff can seem complex, but really once you get started, you just kind of start picking up and it becomes easier to learn new things. So the pace of change is picking up as well. There's new devices, there's new technology like Gen AI, there's new accessibility standards coming out like WCAG 2.2, was the most recent. And even like things like plugins and browsers, change accessibility. So you kind of have to stay have one foot in this game at all times in order to stay abreast of the changes. So how are you going to carve out time to learn? And how will you bring along your team? Like Denise mentioned, we do value progress over perfection. I think this gives us, the ability to not be perfect and to realize that we can't do all the things at once. Another way that I've heard this said in PM community is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And so now we're going to look at maybe the top 3 things that are very tangible and somewhat easy to wrap your head around that create 70 or 80% of the bugs in our backlog. And we think that by tackling these top 3 things, you too could like knock out a whole bunch of bugs out of your backlog. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. Pam gave a really good introduction on what accessibility is and key action. Now let's look into top things to consider when we are designing a product and how can we move the needle in accessibility. So the first thing to start with is a keyboard support. So the keyboard users are the ones with the limited mobility, such as a user with a spinal cord injury, or a user with a paralysis, or it could be a screen reader user, or a power user, such as a gamer or a programmer. So keeping these personas in mind and building the product will be definitely helpful. So let's meet the persona. Here I have Aid. Aid was involved in an accident which caused a spinal cord injury, which limits the usage of his arms, and he relies on the keyboard to interact with the digital website or digital content. So some of the barriers that Aid encounters is when there is no clear indication on the page where actively the Aid is interacting or where actively interacting with the component. And the second barrier that Aid encounters is when it comes to the pop-up or like modal. The Aid will open the modal, but it's very hard for him to close the modal and get back to the element which instantiated the modal. So in the next slide, let's look at the examples, how we can improve Aid's experience or any keyboard user experience. So when it comes to the keyboard users, it's very important to keep in mind that when we are designing a product, the product should have the keyboard support equivalent to the mouse user support. And also, now to put things into more perspective, let's go through this video. So the first thing to start is every interactive element on the web page. The interactive elements are the links, buttons, or any form elements should be reachable by using the tab key on the keyboard. So the tab key here, again, I have an virtual keyboard here. The tab key is something that I'm highlighting using my mouse here. So it should be reachable by tab and shift tab keys. So I'm going to just play this video to show how the user can tab through this particular digital website. The user is navigating through the navigation now. And the other thing that I want to highlight as the user navigates in this page is the reading order. When it comes to the keyboard navigation, the tab order or like the tab focus should match the user's natural reading order. What that means is the Latin and English languages, the reading order is from left to right. So the tab focus should move from left to right. And when it comes to an Arabic user, the reading order for Arabic language is from right to left. So the reading order, like the tab order should start from left and move towards right. So that's what we saw on this page right now. So the user will start navigating. And then the other important thing that I want to focus here, and again, the problem which Aid had earlier was not actively indicating where Aid is currently on the page. So here, the focus indicator here is our solution. The focus indication here is nothing but the blue line, which is clearly indicating Aid where he is on the page. So we're saying that he is currently on the guidelines navigation button. And now let's look into a widget example. So I'm going to just forward the video and let's jump back to an example that I have in mind. So I took an example of modal here because Aid had some issue with like modal, and I wanted to see how we can design a modal from accessibility first mindset. So as a user, I press enter, a keyboard user, I press enter or space bar to activate the button, which opens up the modal overlay for me. When it comes to modal, the modal becomes the active screen, and everything in the background becomes the background screen. So for a keyboard user, the focus should retain on the active screen, which is the modal in this case. So now if I continue playing the video, like if I tap through it, the focus is tapped between the close button and the 2 buttons down below. And then the next problem that Aid had was when he wanted to close the modal. So there should be if we consider a keyboard user persona, it's important to provide a close button and program it using a semantic button so that it is reachable by tap, and also ensure that the button can be clearly closed by using the escape key. So I'll play the video, and as a user, I'm pressing the escape key here next. So when I press the escape key here, the expectation is that the modal will close. So which is what we are seeing here. I'm going to press the escape key and the modal gets closed, and then the focus returns back to the element which instantiated, which was our like the button called open license. So again, these are some examples that are a good start when it comes to accessibility. When it comes to the keyboard accessibility. Now let's move on to the next slide, which is about assistive technologies. Assistive technologies are the technology or the software which is usable by visually impaired, low vision users. A good example for assistive technologies are a screen reader or braille or like speech to text or like a screen magnifier tool. For our presentation today, we are considering screen readers. The screen readers are like, is a software which is used by a visually impaired person to navigate the digital product. The persona that we have is Lakshmi today. Lakshmi is a senior accountant who is blind, and she relies on screen reader to navigate a product. Now, some of the barriers that Lakshmi encounters is when she cannot easily understand the structure of the web page. And the second barrier that she encounters is while processing the error on any form. When the errors does not clearly indicate her how to resolve, that becomes a barrier for Lakshmi. So moving on to the next slide, let's see how we can improve the screen reader experience. The first thing that I want to start with is by saying, when it comes to designing a product for screen reader, if we code the page by using a valid semantics, most of the accessibility related issues can be resolved by just coding with a valid semantics. Now let's put things into more perspective. So I'm gonna again play this video. So here, this page is being coded using the valid semantic structure tags. What that means is this page has been coded by using the semantic tags such as side nav, or like article or footer bar. When a screen reader user, again, I'm having this page, or like I'm navigating the page using the voice over, which is a screen reader. And then in the screen reader, I'm enabling the landmark. I'm using the rotor, I'm enabling the landmark. The landmark here is a powerful tool which can be used to know the different sections of the page. And here, if we see there is banner, the landmark is clearly indicating that the page has a banner, search bar, and then side navigation, main content, footer, so on. So this will help Lakshmi to visualize like how the structure of the page is on the website. And let's move on to the next part. As a user, I decide to navigate to the main section, and the next thing that I want to highlight here is the heading tags. So what we have seen when we design for a product, like the header tags is something that is left out, and the div tags are used to design the headers. The problem with that is the screen readers perceive or like understand semantics better than the div tag. The div tag basically is a structure tag for screen readers, so it won't be able to process the header tag, like div tags better. So in this example, because the valid h1 tag has been used, the screen reader identifies that, and then it is reading it out very clearly, saying that we have navigated to the main page, and the main page has a heading level 1, which should be descriptive enough to describe the main content of the page, which is like here in this case it says Workday Canvas design system. Now let's move on to the form, where which was the second piece that Lakshmi had an issue with. Again, form can get very tricky for a screen reader user if the visual label is not clearly associated or programmatically associated with the field. So the label here is the phone number, and the label phone number should be programmatically associated with the text field, which is the edit box that we see here. So when they are programmatically linked, what happens is when the screen reader user has the cursor on the text input field, it clearly announces that the user is currently editing a text field, and the text field is expected a phone number, which is very helpful for a screen reader to know where they are on the page. So this is the expected behavior. Now, if we move on to the next piece where Lakshmi had issue with the error processing. When it comes to the error processing, similar how the label has to be associated with the field, it's also important to associate the error with the field. And when the error is clearly associated with the field, the screen reader announces it very clearly, saying that when the cursor is on the field, it clearly announces the error and also states clearly that there is an error on the field. So here, if we see what screen reader is announcing is, it's saying that there is an error and the data entered is invalid, which is helpful for Lakshmi to resolve the issue. Now we saw like simple examples. Now let's move on to a little bit complex component, which is drop down. Drop down, like when we think about the drop down, our expectation is like we click on the drop down and then there is a list which pops up. But these things has to be specifically clearly announced to the screen reader. Like the screen reader should announce how many elements are there in the list. So when we are designing for the screen reader, these are the small things that we need to consider. So if we are designing the drop down, not just like announcing what value has been selected, along with that, we should also ensure that the elements in the drop down is also announced. And also, like, if we see, I want to highlight here 1 of 3, which is clearly indicating that drop down has 3 active elements, and the screen reader user is actively on the first element. I mean, these are some small details that will make a big impact for the screen reader user. Now let's move on to the next section, which is use of color. So in this section, let's talk about when the product heavily relies on the color, or like, the color choices that is made on the product, how they affect a colorblind user or a user with low vision. So the color blindness is a condition when an individual cannot distinguish between the certain color patterns or cannot perceive current color clearly. So in US, 1 in 12 are colorblind, and color blindness is most commonly found in men. So here on this slide, a colorblind person would not be able to like recognize the numbers which are listed in this circle. So again, we did this an activity as part of accessibility awareness. We did meet few folks who were not aware that they are actually colorblind, which was which was a good awareness that we created, and we wanted to bring this to this group as well. Now let's meet the persona, who is Lexi. Lexi is an older adult who loves online shopping, but Lexi cannot see all the colors equally. And some of the barriers that Lexi encounters is while filling out the form, when the error and the success stage or the required state are truly based on the colors. And the second one is with the charts. When the data on the charts solely rely on the color, processing the charts becomes very hard for Lexi. The next persona that I want to introduce is the low vision user. The low vision users are the users who have like blurry vision, and they require like extra support, like screen magnification or a browser zoom support to read through the contents. So here, Sarah is a low vision user. The low vision for her is caused by macular degeneration, and some of the the barriers that Sarah encounters is when the text and the background color contrast do not pass the ratio of 4:1, then it's hard for her to read through because it puts too much strain on her eyes. The second problem that she encounters is when the website is coded with the fixed font, and when the versus coding it through the adaptive font, she cannot scale the website up or like zoom through the text, which makes it hard for her to read through the website. Moving on to the next slide, let's see how we can improve the experience for the colorblind as well as the low vision user. The first thing to keep when we are designing a product with the color, or when we are doing the color consideration, is to ensure that the text, there is enough text contrast ratio. Like from VECAC perspective, like the expected contrast ratio is 4.5:1. The non-text contrast ratio is 3:1. And the second important thing to remember is not to rely on the color alone when we are designing the product. Now let's look at an example to put things more into perspective. So here I have a simple password update page. I want to highlight 3 things on this page. Here, the error state, the success state and an error state is solely done using the colors. And the next one that I want to highlight is the 2 buttons, like where submit button and then the cancel button. The submit button has lower contrast ratio compared to the cancel. So let's see how a color-blind individual would see this page. So I'm doing the red and green color blindness in this scenario. Now I have a simulator to show what a colorblind individual would see. So now if we see on this page, the password and the re-enter password are on the bronzer tone and not like, not on the red or green indicating the error state. So it's very like here, basically, like because the color is on the same tone, it will be hard for a colorblind person to even know that there was an error on this page. Now, if we talk about the color contrast, right? Let's move on to the color contrast, which I was talking about earlier. The submit text here and the background color of the submit button has a lower contrast ratio compared to the cancel. So the submit text here almost submerges with the backgrounds, which makes it very hard for an individual to read compared to the cancel button here. So now if I simulate what a moderate vision loss user would see, is like, the screen is currently blurred because I have the simulator on. And if you can see, like the submit text is almost like blurred out, and then, it's almost combined with the background text, which makes it very hard for an individual to read. Versus like cancel, yeah, there is some blurring, but still the character can be recognized, or the characters are still can be recognized. So yeah, like as I said, like these are like the two things, like to ensure that we don't just rely on the colors, and also to ensure that there is enough color contrast ratio. And third thing is using adaptive fonts. The adaptive fonts are like using the percentages or like EMs, like these are like CSS font types to ensure that the user can zoom through the browsers. Now let's move on to the next section. So now we spoke about the different personas and what are the 3 things to do. Now moving on to the section of what are some of the toolings that can be used to test the above personas or the above scenarios. So what we learned was like accessibility can be an afterthought. So how can we help is by baking in accessibility checks, or like baking in the tools into the accessibility tools into the environment that the users already use can help us two purpose. First one, creating the awareness, and second one, preventing the accessibility issues to be surfaced on production. So it's important to embed like toolings. So when we consider like software development cycle, these are the 4 main phases, right? So if we start with the design and prototype, when we like in design and prototype, most of the color contrast issues, text resize issues, or reflow issues can be easily addressed if the accessibility awareness is there among the designers and designers. So like the tool that we use in Workday is Figma, the designer tool. Figma is amazing. It does come with like good accessibility plugins that a designer can use. to test out or simulate the accessibility experience, and also ensure that the accessibility issues are surfaced or like fixed way early in the cycle. Now, if we move on to the development phase, the issues such as not using the valid semantics, or a really good example is like alt tag missing on an image. These are some of the issues which can be easily addressed if we use an extension for the code editors or like the linters. The linters are nothing but it's like it runs through the code and then it prompts the developer with all the accessibility issues. Or like if we move on to the code maintenance, like ensuring that our code has a good accessibility standard, creating good unit tests or automations would definitely help here. And now if we move on to the build and deploy phase, the build and deploy phase, like the GitHub actions can run the combinations of linters and unit test cases, which will be good, which will make sure that the code standard is maintained. Plus, it can be used as a powerful tool to create reports, like running these reports just before like the code gets released to production to know like this accessibility state of the product will be definitely helpful. The last stage, which is the testing phase. These tools are amazing, but the manual testing is equally important in accessibility. Doing a simple manual test, such as like keyboard test by using the keyboard or by using the screen readers. Here, the link I have provided link for NVIDIA and VoiceOver because these are the free tools. VoiceOver is the free tool which is available on Mac, and NVIDIA is for Windows. Again, just ensuring that the screen reader user can easily navigate with the page is a good starting step. So here I have a quote from Elizabeth Delson. You can't make progress on what you can't measure. Basically, what it says, the fundamental idea is the progress requires tracking. The tools that I introduced like earlier would help to measure and also to identify the gaps in your product. Next, Pam is going to talk about like how to establish like metrics or how to track, like establish a clear metrics for future tracking.
Yeah, last section, we're almost home. How will my work affect end users and the bottom line? So let's talk about metrics and storytelling next, and I'm just going to read these three questions to you. How do we measure progress? How do we tie accessibility to the bottom line? And what success metrics will motivate people to take action? So it doesn't need to be complex. We can kind of divide things into three buckets here. So as a PM, I want to know about the major and critical bugs in my backlog. Those are the most impactful things for me to fix. I want to understand dependencies on other teams. And I want to understand the end users who are most affected by those bugs, right? So moving on to the middle column, once you understand the current state, you can start to take action. So you can include those impactful bugs, the criticals, in your roadmap. You can assign fixed dates, you can track aging, and you can track progress and report out and start to celebrate wins, because really all of these accessibility bugs, each one that you fix means that more users can use your software or your product, right? And then third, we tie it into the big picture. So we connect it to increased revenue and reduced risk. An example internally, we're working on spinning up a win-loss report, and that would really tie our activities during the sales cycle to accessibility being really important to these prospects who are considering buying Workday, right? Next up, we want to provide context with storytelling, and we have a whole slide to cover that on the next one. So after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the things we need most in the world. There's a great quote from Philip Pullman, and I think stories really appeal to that part of us that sits huddled in the cave, with our family around the campfire, and we're really hoping the saber-toothed tiger doesn't find us, right? And we need stories now more than ever. So a nice example of storytelling that came up recently was my colleague Michael Bloom was writing about WCAG 2.2, the latest accessibility standard, and it could have been a really dry read, right? But he related it all back to aid, and that made it really interesting, and it kind of felt like a story when he told it. So for example, aid can use the autocompletes from 2.2 to help reduce his fatigue and reduce his typing. The large touch targets in 2.2 make it easier for aid to submit a form. And that keyboard-friendly drag and drop means that aid can modify a menu and put the most used thing at the top where it's most accessible, right? And we as a team believe in carrot over stick, the power of the end user experience and collaboration. And how are these things going to show up in our stories? Well, tune in next year on LinkedIn, because we're going to have about a story every month or two, and we're going to be highlighting all these things. So I'm going to have everyone now take out their phones and do the obligatory scan of the QR code, please. There's also a bit.ly accessibility level up URL there in case the QR code isn't working for you. Go ahead and do that and sign up for Level Up. Level Up is a series that's starting in February, and it's really exciting. It's kind of like whenever Sal Khan, started doing Khan Academy, and he started with, what is zero? Well, like the very basic things. We're going to do the same thing. What is digital accessibility? And we're going to build on that knowledge and get up to a really expert level with some really technical role-based trainings. And PM will be one of those. And we're really excited to launch this and provide something for everybody. Moving on to the 3 takeaways next. So don't boil the ocean, right? Take action, however small. If you try to do everything, you'll end up doing nothing. And really, there's no such thing as multitasking. Just focus on one thing, bring it through to completion. And one example of how you can do this, not boil the ocean, is really take a look at the list of resources on the next page and pick one that you want to dive into. And I would recommend those personas that we talked about, like AID, Lakshmi, and others. Those are really interesting because they kind of provide that end user perspective and give us insight into how other people are using our websites, right, and our products. Thing number 2 here, define the actions you want people to take. So as PMs, right, we are always thinking about metrics, but the metrics that we stand up should really help drive those actions that we want people to take in terms of accessibility. And I like to think of this as there's outputs and there's outcomes, and they're both very important. So an example of an output might be like, I fixed 50 bugs last week. And an example of an outcome might be, wrapping it in an outcome might be, I fixed 50 bugs last week, and this makes the Japanese screen reader experience just so much better, right? And then people really understand the so what. Thing number 3, make accessibility checks contextual and easy. So, Divya talked about embedding accessibility and tooling. That might be a phase 2 or a phase 3 thing, but maybe you can start with a simple checklist and, get your whole team thinking about this. So, can I navigate with keyboard? Can I navigate with screen reader? And am I using color sensibly, right? So moving on to our resource list, Denise will share this out after the call, so I'm not going to read through this whole thing. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We believe that accessibility is becoming a mainstream conversation. It's no longer just accessibility teams talking about it, but it's PMs and engineers and salespeople and legal people. We're all talking about it. So the more we can support each other, the better. Please connect with me and Divya on LinkedIn, and Elle as well. Elle Waters is here as well. She's going to help us answer questions. We welcome advocates and new members in this community. It's a very supportive community, I think you'll find as you connect with us. So we talked about the practical reasons and the business case for accessibility, but really at the end of the day, it's really about empowering people with access and autonomy, and that's something we can all get behind. Denise, over to you for questions.
All right. Well, it's over to me only to field them right back to you. I know we've got limited time for questions today.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump right in. The first one here is, what tips do you have for prioritizing accessibility with competing product roadmaps and deadlines?
Can I take that one?
Yeah. So when it comes to the product, so knowing your product is the first key. Simple audits could help to analyze your product and understand if there are any critical issues. Start addressing those critical issues is a good way to start, because if it becomes very expensive to resolve the issue if customer logs it, because you have to involve multiple teams at that point, which is expensive. So doing these internal audits and knowing your product health and addressing critical issues is helpful. And I would want to give an example here. Example is if a person with disability cannot fill out a job description and you found out with your audit, it's better that you address those issues even before a customer reports it, because that doesn't even become it's not just a critical issue, it will also be a legal issue at that point.
Yeah. And I would just add, it's very important to address issues in components. And we have a really nice relationship with the component teams, both of them here at Workday. Because if you address some accessibility issues in the component, when it gets released, it rolls out to 8,000 places, right? And it's like a really impactful way to make great accessibility changes.
Love that. It's like the rising tide raises all boats.
Yep.
You also mentioned kind of, people doing particular workflows. And then we also talked about these personas. And so if I were somebody that had limited resources to invest, and you think about how I might get started, would you advise, hey, think about Abe or a persona like that and tackle a given persona? Or do you think about it like, hey, I want to tackle the things that are, the broadest set of people, used by the broadest set of people, but might touch a lot of personas? Can you kind of share how you think about prioritizing, when you do have maybe a big body of work that you've got to tackle?
Do you want to take that one?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me crash your party. My name is Elle Waters, and I work at Workday. I think that I usually look at what is going to give me the most value for the least amount of effort. And it's, taking agile best practices and looking at that. So if I were looking at a body of things that need to be resolved, I think personas are important to humanize and to understand that this impacts real people in real lived experiences. But if I was looking at sort of a massive project, I would look at what, to your second option, what has the most value for the least amount of effort. So keyboard and color contrast are always mentioned because, especially with color contrast, other than the arguments about which hex value to use, it's a relatively small fix for a huge value. For every one person using a screen reader, there's likely to be about 8 people who would be categorized as low vision and who would benefit from increased contrast. So if you can get through the ideological and sort of sometimes political discussions about colors, and you can lean on better contrast, that has an almost immediate value for very little effort. And then keyboard, I think I put that so high because, to your point, there are several different groups of individuals who are not just impacted, but profoundly impacted by lack of keyboard access. Sometimes those are simple fixes. Sometimes they are sort of systemic changes, which is when Pam was talking about shifting left, always the consideration.
Yeah, and to add that, like if we consider, if we design for screen reader users, like keyboard users also benefits. So it's like if we design one, it will be beneficial for 2 different personas as well.
And so how do you think about getting folks started on the team? Like if the team maybe doesn't have the skills, right? They don't know how to use a screen reader. How might you get a team educated so that they feel more competent in the world of accessibility?
I think you just start talking about it and you start small, right? So exploring that color contrast, you can just use one on the interwebs, or you can download a program. That's a really easy place to start because it's very easy for everyone to understand. I mean, I think screen readers are a little more tricky to wrap your head around. There is a learning curve, and with screen readers, like one thing that's really helpful is just to slow it way down, right? So if I say to you, ¿Dónde está el baño? And you might be like, whoa, what'd she just say? Like that's a screen reader in default mode. But if I say to you, ¿Dónde está el baño? Suddenly you can understand all the words. And so if you spend an hour with a screen reader, slow it way down, like listen to what your page is saying to you is a really great way to get started.
And also the good thing with screen reader users is once you get proficient with one screen reader, it's the same concept. You navigate using the virtual cursor. So you don't have to learn 3 different screen readers. Be proficient with one, and like other screen readers are very easy to navigate as well.
Spanish and Portuguese.
And I think it depends on where in the life cycle that somebody needs to learn about accessibility. If they're fixing an issue, then I would not normally advise getting into the deep end of the ocean with assistive technology. I would be looking at what is the simplest way I can validate that I've fixed the issue. If you're creating a new component, then you want to spend a lot more intensive time in really understanding all those different types of ways that people might access that content.
Got it. And what I think I'm hearing all of you say a little bit is also walk a mile in somebody's shoes, right? Start using the tool a little bit yourself And then you'll
I-
realize, the value that it brings to making these fixes. And, then also you can become hopefully an advocate within your own team or organization.
Yeah, we
and
all have
hire
keyboards.
people with disabilities.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another one. Is it safe to assume that accessibility tools for iOS and Android solve accessibility needs for apps? So sort of, I think the built-in accessibility tooling that you get from iOS or Android, or do you find with mobile applications, you need to do more on top of what's built in?
Yeah, like if you're talking about, the apps, like there's different set of testing that you need to do versus a web browser. So I would say like navigating a web browser might be a little bit different versus, actually navigating through the web application. And like the same, like if I take iOS, VoiceOver could be the tool that can be used to navigate both, but the test cases, the scenarios for both will be a little bit different.
Is it fair to say that when I'm testing my app, I can't completely automate all the tests? Is there also an element of manual testing over there?
Yeah, like when it comes to accessibility, manual testing is equally important because there could be there are like the automation tests are great, it does cover, but when it comes to accessibility, manual testing is very important. A simple example is like if you have a farm label and if you have to fill out the full name, if you type something else in the label, for example, like ABC or something, if it doesn't convey that, then it has to have a full name, then it defeats the purpose. The manual testing comes into picture in that time.
I think iOS and Android have fantastic accessibility documentation. So I would say that it is probably a little easier for a mobile developer to get up to speed because there's a lot built in by default. But to Divya's point, you have to actually do those things. It's a little more Wild West with like React or .NET. You might find some accessibility documentation, but I don't think it's as clear cut as mobile, at least.
Yeah.
Got it.
They also have a lot of the same user problems. A mobile user has the same challenges sometimes as a low vision user.
Yeah. I think we were commiserating about that all the time. I have continued to increase my font on my wall. I think every time I age a year. Would you all mind maybe stopping the screen share just so that we can see your faces a little bit more? And I think we only have time, unfortunately, for one last question. But Pam, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned, which is at one point you referenced AI. And I'm curious, there's a lot of overlay tools and, maybe AI that's coming out to potentially help address accessibility challenges. What are the trends that you're seeing as you think about product managers maybe needing to keep, kind of one foot in this space at all times that we should watch for?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on with the intersection of AI and accessibility right now. We just finished a capstone project with Tepper, which is Carnegie Mellon's business school. And that was really enlightening because there's, they brought us back a market map and there's like 100 things on there. And it's roughly divided into, sight, hearing, cognitive, and physical. And there's just so much going on in all these different spaces. I mean, one of the ones that we're most interested in and that we're pursuing is charts, right? Because charts are so inaccessible and nobody's kind of really cracked that nut. So two things. One, wouldn't it be cool if you could query the chart and ask it what its point is, right? Because like a lot of times I look at a chart and I'm not visually impaired and I look at a chart and I don't know what the point is. So that would benefit everyone. And then the other idea is to bypass the chart altogether and really query the underlying data, because there's probably stories, a chart is an abstraction, and there's probably stories that aren't being told there. So if I'm able to ask my questions of the data, I'll probably get like more targeted answers to what I'm really interested in. So that's just one example of, AI and charts that we're kind of like really exploring right now. And did you guys have other exampple you wanted to mention?
No, I just wanted to talk about the overlay, because it was part of the question.
Yeah.
Overlays are great, but it does not solve it does not solve a lot of accessibility issues. The reason is when we are coding for accessibility, it comes from the basics. Adding the overlay would not fix the semantic HTML, or it wouldn't make the DOM structure better. So it's not just my opinion. Last year, this was a talk in assisted CSUN, which is assisted technology conference. like overlay. I mean, it's the community-wide, like saying that, overlays does not solve all the problem. So go back to the basics, code the page with like the good semantic HTML.
Yeah, it's like a Band-Aid, right?
Right.
Another good example is the Workday Assistant. So this was announced in Rising this year. And basically that assistant has access to all of our documentation. So again, you could imagine it would be really powerful because you could ask a plain English question like, how should I set up my benefits for my employees? And it would just give you kind of step-by-step instructions. You wouldn't have to like hunt through menus or read a bunch of tables or navigate, and try to find the information, but you could just ask and it would provide you with, clear instructions. And I think that's just going to be such a time saver, not to people with disabilities, but really to all of us, right?
Yeah. No, that's amazing. So I love it.
Yeah.
But I hear you saying is charting, hopefully there's a solution coming someday. As a
Yeah,
lover of
yeah.
all things analytics, that's amazing. Overlays are not the panacea, do it right.
Yeah.
And then, on this last piece, there's certainly more to come on the AI front overall, but, we can find a lot of tools and technologies that, what's good for those people who need accessibility are really good for everyone.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I think we've got to end it there. I could ask you 100 more questions, but this will be available on the How to Product YouTube channel with all those resources from Pam and Divya. So again, thank you both so much for your time, and thanks, Elle, for joining us as well. Really appreciate it. And happy holidays, everybody.
Thanks, Denise.
Thanks, Denise.